Thank you. And so our next speakers are going to be Ismael Valenzuela and Jose Luis Sanchez Martinez from Trellix. Compelling stories are a good way to help everyone get on the same page for raising awareness and enabling defenders to act on cyber threats. But it's always essential to tell a story that resonates and is understandable to your audience, something that's already becoming a theme this morning. Next talk is going to discuss how they've used ATT&CK to accomplish this and tell some of these stories. Please welcome to the stage Ismael and Jose.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much to Adam and to Jamie and the whole MITRE ATT&CK team for having us here in person. I have to say that I was trying to remember when was the last time we were here, and it's almost like 3 years ago. So thank you so much. There's so much energy, and it's so refreshing to see people back in person. Now, we're going to talk about this storytelling and how that relates to what we're discussing here, right? CTI and enabling defenders. My name is Ismael Valenzuela, and I'm a SPEDO master. These keywords are important, right? So this is your OSINT challenge for the day. You got to figure out what SPEDO means. And Jose Luis, you have something to say here?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jose Luis Sanchez. All the people know me as Joselillo. I am from Spain. And the most important thing that you have to know from me is that I am a salmorejo master. So if you don't know what is a salmorejo, I recommend you to search it into Google. And after that, we can discuss this.
We also have a co-author in this presentation. He couldn't be here. Alejandro from Argentina, Asado Master. That's another one. You may know a little bit about this one. So when we're discussing about this talk and how to talk about this, we were thinking it would be great if we had a way in which we could just like transfer our knowledge, right? Like a tool where we could say, you know what, this is my experience from the last 20 years doing cyber defense, and just like transfer it to somebody, might be younger or newer in the field, and just like transfer absolutely everything, like in one go, right? That would be amazing. So I would be like, what that would look like if I had to transfer all my knowledge to Joselillo, like my early days doing infrastructure and building networks and securing those networks, and then teaching classes. And it's not everything about work, right? So it's also about like soccer. We call it football because we play with the foot. So winning Real Madrid, big thing for us, right? Sorry, Jorge. Is Jorge in the audience? No, it's a good friend of mine, Jorge Quiles, right? Big Real Madrid fan, but it's all good. So Joselillo, what it will look like for you if you had to transfer all that knowledge for me at once?
If I could transfer information to you, I will transfer how to analyze different intrusions using the diamond model and the kill chain files. Also, how to understand the terrorist groups are working right now, because I was a student of the counterterrorism degree. And also, the most important thing is when Messi take off the T-shirt in the Santiago Bernabeu Stadium after score a goal.
So as you can see, we love our soccer. But now the key thing is there is a tool to actually do that, and it's the power of storytelling. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is a very interesting research coming from Princeton University from a few years ago. I think it's 2016, where they took MRIs and they gauged the brain activity in a listener and a speaker. A speaker was sharing a story. And it turns out that when you share a story, especially a real life story, to your audience, and people start relating to that, the brain activity, the brain waves start to align, which is amazing. So it might be actually happening during this talk, hopefully, right? That where brain waves are, I know it sounds like weird, but it actually happens. So they did some analysis. Why is that this happens? Why is that when somebody tells a story, you start to align with the speaker, and that motivates you, changes maybe even your behaviors, your beliefs. And it comes to these points that we have here. Full meaning, so you have to have context. It's not just like isolated words. They actually did some tests with this. That means you have to have context. You have to have expression as well, expressiveness, and you have to have a common ground. That common ground could be language, right? We need to be able to speak the same language, like we're speaking here, so we all understand each other, even though we have different accents and different background. But it also could be something like, why does it really matter what you're telling me, right? And I think we all here have the same kind of a common ground because we all are interested in, CTI and how to enable more cyber defenders. So when this happens, then you start getting understanding, which is the goal here. Taking this to the cyber realm, why is this important? we're just talking about how, and Selena was talking about this, Justin and Jason were talking about this as well, the power of giving context, meaning. Because sometimes the reports that we have, intelligence reports, they may lack that meaning. They might be mostly IOC based. That would be like, just throwing random words at somebody. But what's the story, right? Tell me that story. Expressionless. We have a very good presentation from our buddy, colleague Carlos Diaz, that he did recently at the DFIR Summit, talking about how tools can have expression to convey more understanding, or how sometimes the same information can be conveyed in a very raw format, and we don't get that. And it's also important to understand our audiences. Back to the conversations we've had before, right, with Selena and Justin and Jason, they were talking about this. If we don't have that, we don't have a story. What we have is a report that may have limited distribution, partial understanding, and it's not going to enable somebody, right, to take action. It's not going to motivate somebody to know, okay, this is what I need to do. So what we did was, together with some of our colleagues in the AC3 team, we started to build this initiative, Threat Sightings, right? This is, how old is this, Joselillo?
We published the Threat Sightings on September.
So about, less than a year old, right? And we've done a number of presentations. We're not going to go deep into the schema of threat sightings. We're going to show you some examples. More importantly, we're going to show you how to use this. And it doesn't mean that you have to use it, right? We're going to share the story, our story of how we have used it and how we have been able to enable other people that might not be used to work with cyber threat intelligence reports, and how we're using this to essentially augment or increase the understanding. Now, we talked about words, and in this experiment they did at the Princeton University, it was very obvious that when you talk to somebody and just like give them random words, or even words that make part of a story without the context, that's not enough. But our experience, what we have seen in many cases, that a lot of people have like MISP instances, right? But they don't have enough context around those that MISP instance. And Jason and Justin, again, they talked about this before, how important it is to have not just storage, because data by itself doesn't increase understanding. It's about having the right labels, the right context around it, the right structure. And now you can start understanding what you have. In many instances, what we have seen is that these MISP databases, what they have is a lot of IOCs, right? IPs, hashes, domains. One of the things I always say is that if you look at your MISP database or any of the threat intelligence collection, and that enables you to create hypotheses, and you can go hunting based on those hypotheses, based on that data, then you're probably closer to the top of the pyramid, right? To the TTPs. You have more expression. But if you look at your MISP database and all you can do is searches based on IOCs, like IPs and queries, or domains or hashes, then those queries, they don't have enough expression. You don't have a full story. So that's what we're trying to do with this, right? We're trying to focus on obviously the TTPs, but surrounded with enough context so we can work with that. Now let's show you an example. What are we seeing here, Joselillo?
Here is just an example about our schema in the threat sightings. The more deeper you go from the left to the right, the more understanding you are getting from the threat sighting. The first line of the code is just an example or a description, a high-level description about the TTPs. We are using the same concept as MITRE have already in their website. If we go down to the behaviors, we have also the small description. Also, it's also a high-level description, but a little bit more context about the specific behavior that is carrying out. But if you go into the right, in this case, where we have the field called files, where we have the information like the path, the name, the process, the SHA, that information is the understanding about the campaign. We are not saying someone is doing a specific technique with a specific tool. We are saying that is happening, and this is where you go to focus on.
So it's a maturity curve, right? If you want, like you have the sightings with a summary, right? High-level summary, then the behaviors. But notice that, and I think there was a question from the audience, right, about sequence before. There is a sense of sequence there that we're going to use to create some representations later on. So it's not the position of those behaviors is not random, but as you said, right, And we also made sure that we chose one example with Mishta, so we could, refer to the meme, right, Mishta? So there you go. So now, once we have that, that's a YAML file, right? And there's a schema. Again, you can visit our site. We're going to give you some links to the GitHub so you can look at the schema that we're using. And if you can contribute back to that, give us some suggestions, please feel free to do that. But now from the YAML, we can use some Python scripts that we have on our GitHub as well that can translate that into different views. So talking about audiences, right? We have different audiences that will consume the data in a different way. This is just like a high-level notes. So what we have is somebody taking quick notes of what's happening. We have a structure, right? Threat actor first, dark side, a verb used, then the technique, and then the tactic. Like, why is this happening? Well, we're using valid credentials over RDP for initial access. We use this, and we have a bunch of software engineers in our team that we follow the agile method of having the threat actor, or the who, the what happened, and the why it happened. That's going to help us also to now automate a lot of this and come up with some meaningful reports. Still, that doesn't give us enough context, right? It's just like very high level. Let's go into the second level of abstraction. Now we have the tactic, the technique, and the procedure. So that's a typical TTP view. We also get now the tactic, the technique number, the technique ID, and that can be useful if we want to do like, for example, some of in our organization, part of our audience is a detection engineer, somebody that needs to write content, right, based on this, or to check if we have coverage for that content. That could be also in a SOC. And we can, maybe create a heat map based on that and say, how much coverage do we have for that particular ID? I don't know, that coverage is a very loaded word here in this context. And here's a view that it's also very common, right? Very useful for red and purple emulation teams, emulation planning. Jorge Urquiles, our friend Jorge Urquiles, and Natalie, they also talked about this. I think Katie Nichols has also talked about this and showed some of these views, which I think it's really useful. We see the observables, but we also have notes. What do we use those notes for?
The notes can help us to understand what is happening, or maybe if we don't know what is an AP call made, we can see what is the purpose of that AP call made.
Right. So we've had an API call, right? We can see exactly what it's doing, and we're going to see an example later on, right? But it might be that you don't know exactly what that API call is being used for, and that node that can give you context. It could be a link, right, to some additional reading. Now, one of the things I like about this is of this YAML file, we create like markdown files that we use to also create a wiki, an internal wiki. So now we have the observables, right, the threat sightings. We just have it in this format, and automatically we can create a page in the wiki where maybe a detection engineer, or it could be a sales engineer, or somebody that's doing customer support can go and reference this without us having to explain this to everybody. So that is creating some sort of a story right there. Now, as you can guess, we like football, right? We like our soccer, and so thinking about how to represent the data, I was thinking how important it is to talk about not just attackers' tactics, but also defenders' tactics, which is probably something we don't talk that much about. And I was thinking about how does a football manager do this, and I thought about Pep Guardiola, right? Obviously, like, we're Barcelona fans, so we like him, and I like this quote because he said, "Well, I sit down, I watch videos, and that is when I get my inspiration. I know how to win. That's when it becomes meaningful." He's got understanding. Now, could we just watch videos as well instead of just like looking at logs when we look at adversarial attack? So a friend of ours, like Carlos Diaz as well, he looked at this GORS tool, and we produced something like this out of telemetry that we obtained out of a ransomware attack, a real one that happened last year. As you can see here, this is just 2 users interacting with the system. Each of these little nodes in the tree is an artifact. It could be file system artifacts, registries, registry keys, sockets, created for that jump box system. Now, at some point, you're going to see this is regular activity. There's going to be an attacker now that joins the scene. Look at that. And notice how the tempo of that activity changes. It's so much faster. Now the attacker is running way faster. It's creating a lot of artifacts, touching a lot of things on the disk, creating a lot of registry keys. And you see that? Right? The socket, communications, command and control, source port incrementing by 1. Right? So very typical from this type of activity. Now, that's the same data we could have seen in just a plain text format, right, in a report. But I think that watching it in that particular way just kind of helps, right? I'm not saying that we're always going to do that, but there is a time factor that it's always hard to see this on a piece of paper, right? You look at the logs, yeah, you could try to infer how the timestamps are changing, but then you see it in the video, and it's like, ooh, whoa, that tells you a story. Now, we're not actually generating these files, MP4 files out of the YAML files yet, but we're getting closer to that. So as part of this project, we're producing automatically with Docusaurus and Mermaid these graphs, right, that can give you an idea of sequence, can give you an idea of like what's the flow, and we generate these automatically, put it into our internal wikis. So now anybody looking at these reports, you can see the full story, and you can see that. Now, that is useful, right? But we're not asking anybody to throw everything they're doing, right? Throw all their tools and then change their language, because we want to follow that. We want to find that common ground. So how does this integrate with other languages that people can speak in the, in the threat intel team? Yep, like for example, Maltego or Stix or OpenIOC.
Okay, we have seen with Ismael how we are increasing the knowledge and the understanding about the threats. But now, when we were working on our schema, we asked to ourselves a really nice question related to this one that I will show you now. This question is: are video games made for all the audience? Probably the answer here is easy, because it's not. There are rating bars that can help us to understand if the video game was made for a specific age. And when we were creating our schema and the information that we want to store, we asked to ourselves, are cybersecurity reports made for all the audience? This is similar, like Selena said before, no? The answer here, we can have here different points of view, but in my opinion, the answer is no. Why? Because we have different levels of audience where they are getting information. For example, a reverse engineering report can be useful for CTI analysts, for threat hunters, but maybe a threat landscape report is useful for any chief of cybersecurity. However, threat detection engineers can create any detection rule with this type of reports. Moving on to the next slide, in our threat sightings, what are we trying to show to the different audience? What we have now in our schema. The low level, we have the tactical level, where we have different level of audience, like SOC analysts, incident responders, threat hunters, and the information that we have for them is Sigma rules. We have Sigma rules to create new detection rules in their environments, mapped to each behavior. We have also IOCs, IP addresses, domains, file hashes, and also we have behaviors, the TTPs, the high level of the behaviors of the threat actors. In the operational level, we have information for SOC managers, CTI analysts, threat detection engineers, like context. For example, tools used, industries affected, countries affected, all the context about the campaign. We have also the behaviors. Here is the low level, all the processes, the command lines, the file creates, the registry events, and also the MITRE attack. We have for each behavior, we have one tactic and one technique. Finally, the strategical level, we have information for head of cybersecurity, security strategies, CISO, and the information that we have for them is trends, like the most LOL-based use in the threat sightings, the most affected industries in the threat sightings, and we are giving them information to prioritize the security efforts. And we can see in the following slide this one. So for this reason, there might be audience and analysts who don't speak the same language, no? And we have created tools to convert our information from the threat sightings to different languages. Let's start with showing you different scenarios. The first one is a CTI team that only speaks MITRE. It's normal. what we are doing with that, we can convert our threat sightings to navigator layers of MITRE, helping the operation teams and the strategical levels to get more information about the threat sighting, to get more context. We have a heat map, and also if you put your mouse over a specific technique, you have all the behaviors related to that specific technique. That information is can be useful for the CTI analyst in order to maybe do some purple teaming or something like that. Another scenario that we have is maybe a SOC that has been working with sticks over the last 4 years. The stick is probably one of the most schemas used in the industry. So we can convert the information of our threat sightings in JSON format for sticks in 2 different types of visualization. We have the high-level visualization where the analyst can get the information for actor, weapons, techniques, and tactics used in our threat sightings. And also we have the low level with information like the actor, weapons, and IOCs. Maltigo is another tool that we believe that is being used for different themes, and also we want to cover the information that we have in our threat sightings to Maltigo. So this is just an example about a conversion of threat sighting to Maltigo that can help us to understand with different types of visualization as well what is going on in the specific threat sighting. So we can convert the threat sightings in 2 levels, high level and low level also, to help to the CTI analysts and the intelligence teams understand the campaign. OpenIOC as well is another schema used by the industry. Our threat sightings can save IOCs, but it's not the required file. But we want to give the opportunity to save the information about the IOC. For that reason, we can convert our threat sightings in the OpenIOC schema to help the different SOC analysts and other roles to understand the information about the IOCs. Finally, here, this is my favorite slide, because it's not all about knowledge about threats. It's about storing also, no? This is a typical scenario that can happen when we have a lead asking us that he need to know all the threat sighting, maybe, that where OpenCS Manager API calls are made. OpenCS Manager is used by ATT&CK for remote services connection. And the team says, yeah, sure, boss, we can get the information and give you all the threat sightings or the events that we have. But remember that our threat sightings at the end are YAML files. So how can we correlate the information from our threat sightings? Like the CrowdStrike team, we are saving all the threat sighting. We are converting the threat sightings to missed events in order to get correlations. That can help us to understand what is going on, understand the story, get correlation about different attributes like API calls, maybe IPs, maybe domains, maybe command lines. So that can help us, no, to understand what is happening. This is just an example where OpenCS Manager was used in 3 different events, and we are getting the correlation, no, with this platform. Finally, the AC3 threat sighting were made for help to the cybersecurity industry to learn about threats, getting the information in a common schema. And we don't want to replace any schema that already exists. We just want to adapt to them and help the different teams to use our threat sightings in their own language.
Yes, and as we said before, at the end of the day, what we want to do with this is to enable cyber defenders, right? Because if we just put a lot of intelligence out there in a format that is not understandable, that it cannot be translated to defensive actions, then we're not really moving the needle in the right direction. So going back to the defensive tactics and how we can translate all of this, I'll use this quote because I think it's very important, right? If you have a team trying to analyzing the attacker, you want to know what to do, but you also need to know when to do it, because tempo is very important. We saw that in the video as well, right? So how does that apply to what we're saying here? Well, we sat together and we came up with this idea of, like, we all know the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, act. But we typically refer to this as, what do you do when you are under attack? You observe the attacker, right? The attack activity, then you orient it, you investigate, you triage, you do incident response, you apply your response playbook, and then you validate the response. You keep doing that, right, until you have an advantage over the adversary. But shouldn't we just talk about what happens before the attack? And we're going to refer obviously to MITRE DEFEND here, but I think that we, as an industry, as a community, we also need to put more effort into this. So we created this model. We're just sharing this as a way of telling a full story. Like, for example, our threat sightings is something that we want to do, and that we actually do as part of our hunting, as part of the telemetry we gather, to observe what's going on out there, to be more prepared, to influence preparedness, to be able to now orient and decide what are our capabilities, what do we have to defend against this, what are the countermeasures that we can apply, and then create what we call internally a defensive playbook, right? How do you measure that? Well, the efficacy is measured through attack simulations. You don't have to wait right until an attack happens for you to measure that. So this is like an end-to-end series of OODA loops before the attack, during the attack, and after the attack. What happens and how it relates to threat sightings. As part of this work, we're also working on, and this is something that I would like to continue working with the community and with all of you on some implementations. We call these defensive playbooks, but the idea is to come up with a set of tactics, right? With a common schema that we can also follow, and we can have humans consuming, but also machines consuming, that can be translated to defensive or countermeasures, right? Active and passive countermeasures that we can use to identify and reduce exposure of the attacks, but also being able to detect, investigate, and respond faster. There are some projects like MITRE DEFEND, Oasis, Cacao as well, that have some interesting schemas. But hopefully we can advance on this in the next few months and come up with some other interesting talk about this. So in summary, these are the links. What we're trying to do with this is to make sure that we have enough context, enough understanding, and that can be translated into something actionable, and that's how we can enable more defenders. If you go to our repo right now, we have a number of sightings there, but I believe that as of now, our colleague Alejandro, he will be like pushing the new content to the repo. So hopefully we're going to have that in the next few minutes. Feel free to ping us. I think he's also on Slack. And we would love to know your opinion on this and see if it's something that's useful for you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic presentation, and I learned myself so many lessons from this, including Espeto. So I'll definitely take you up if it's a wide offer. I'd love to enjoy.
Absolutely.
Just a fair warning: I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately, now. But you do have a really good queue from really awesome feedback and thoughts in the Slack, including some harsh words from George about football. So I'll just warn you ahead of time.
I was expecting that one.
But thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing.